first of all, I'd like to introduce Erin Haynes. She's the Associated Press's national writer on race and ethnicity, covering the intersection of race, politics, culture, identity, and other topics. Based in Philadelphia, she's also written about community policing, gun violence, minority activism, the Black electorate, and urban policy. Erin is also a visiting professor of journalism this semester at Princeton University, teaching a class on Black women and the 2020 election. And just as a little sneak preview, we're working on a little podcast pilot with Erin at WHYY. So stay tuned for that. Please join me in welcoming Erin Haynes. Now, that means we really got to make it happen, Erin.
I guess so. You've already let the cat out of the bag. Jeez.
And now for our guest of honor, Ben Crump. Ben Crump is one of the nation's foremost lawyers and advocates for social justice. Named one of the National Trial Lawyers' top 100 lawyers, he has represented the families of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Stephen Clark, and Tamir Rice, and as he points out, many who were not high-profile cases. We are privileged to have him here to talk about his mission for justice and his call to action to combat what he calls the silent and ongoing systemic killing of people of color. Please join me in welcoming Ben Crump.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I am so looking forward to this conversation with you, Ben, and it's nice to see you in person for once and to be talking about the work instead of doing the work, because, doing the work, it really seems like, we just move from cycle to cycle with these things. We don't really have a lot of time to really reflect on what this movement and really the past almost decade, unfortunately, has meant. For our community, for our society, and for our country. And so to be able to be in conversation with you, thank you for writing this book to give us a reason to be here to talk about a really important and frankly, unfortunately, timely topic. And when has it not been timely in recent years? So I'm glad that we have a chance to do that.
Now, thank you, Erin. And it's hard to believe we first met with Trayvon.
Yeah, 2012.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And boy, how time flies.
Yeah.
Erin, allow me, if I can, to thank Finesse and WHYY, Eugene, Joy, and Sandy for your hospitality. I want to acknowledge, again, Bob Bogle, who I understand is the proprietor of the oldest Black newspaper in America. I think that deserves a round of applause. Certainly to Dr. Epps and all the Omegas, members of Omega Psi Phi. To one of my law partners, Chris O'Neill, who's here, and Tina Joan-Pierre, who actually used to intern in my office when we first started out. And so, Tina, thank you. She's doing well. I don't know where she at. Stand up, Tina. We're very proud of you. And I digress to that, just to say, it warms my heart that all of you, especially my friends, traveled near and far to be here this evening. I promise you we will speak truth to power, because our children matter.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just a couple of housekeeping rules. If you are going to be talking about this conversation tonight on social media, I encourage you to use the hashtag OpenSeason, WHYY. And we are going to have time for questions at the end, so don't worry. But I understand that some of you are interested in Monday Night Football, so I will try to keep the trains running on time if you will help me with that. So let me start. Ben, like you said, we first met. I was covering the Trayvon Martin case as a reporter for the Associated Press. I was based out of Atlanta writing about race. That was 2012, and some would argue, kind of a precursor to the Black Lives Matter era that we now find ourselves in. I know I didn't still expect to be talking to you as much as I am, to be covering as many of these stories as I have. I wonder if you realized that this work was something that you were going to be doing really at such a high-profile level with so many national headlines at the time that we were trying to just get people to pay attention to what was going on with Trayvon Martin.
Absolutely, Aaron. And Thurgood Marshall is my personal hero. And so since I was a fourth grade, little nappy-headed black boy in North Carolina, I knew that what I wanted to do was to become an attorney and fight for people in my community so that we can get equal justice under the law and equal opportunity to the American dream. And so, many people were introduced to me doing Trayvon Martin tragic killing, but before that, there was the Martin Lee Anderson case that happened in 2006 where a little 14-year-old black boy was killed in the Panama City boot camp. And it was captured on a grainy surveillance video. It was Trayvon Martin, before there was the internet and all this social media. But the thing about Trayvon, I want to remind people by bringing up Martin Lee Anderson is, they've been killing black and brown people forever in America. Yeah. It's just that now, for the first time with the advent of technology, we get to see it. I mean, I know I'm not the only one who people said the police brutalized me, the police attacked me, and so forth, and nobody would believe the black people until we were able to show it on video. And so, am I surprised that there are so many other hashtags? I'm not, because I know until we hold a mirror to America's face, and that's what we're trying to do with this book, to say, here's the empirical evidence of how you're killing us, whether it's in the high-profile police shooting cases, or more poignantly, how they kill us every day in every city, in every state, in America, in courtrooms with these trumped up felony convictions, which I refer to, Aaron, as killing us softly.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I mean, for the headlines that we get, and those do seem relentless, I mean, I think that does obscure the fact that 1,000 people a year, more than 1,000 people a year, are shot by the police. Most of those,
1,400 is the average, give or take.
Yeah, most of those don't make the headlines. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to point that out.
Yeah.
Well, 2 years later, we were together again when you were representing Michael Brown's family in Ferguson, which is the case that officially, I guess, launched the Black Lives Matter era. Where would you say that we are 5 years later?
Well, I want to think we're making some progress, but it moves at a snail's pace. It almost seems we will get one step forward and then 2 steps back, a la 45. But I think 2 things, Aaron, with the conviction of Amber Geiger,
right,
a couple of weeks ago.
The white police officer, former Dallas police officer who was convicted in the Botham Jean killing, yes.
Yeah, thank you for that, Aaron.
Sure, just in case, you're not on Twitter or been under a rock, just want to make sure that everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yes, ma'am, and I worked with some great lawyers, Darrell Washington and Lee Merritt, on that case, and it was in the aftermath of that, Dr. Epps, that I said during the interview, this verdict is not just from both of y'all's family, but it's for Trayvon Martin, it's for Michael Brown, it's for Sandra Bland, it's for Alton Sterling, it's for Philando Castile, it's for Eric Gardner, it's for Terrence Crutcher, it's for Stephon Clark, it's for Tamir Rice, it's for Natasha McKinney, it's for Raquel Boyd, and the list just goes on and on and on. And those are only the high-profile cases. And the reason I said that, Aaron, was because if you think about Trayvon was the #1 news story in the world.
Absolutely.
In 2012. Yeah. And I believe Trayvon raised the consciousness level in America that Black Lives Matter. And then certainly Michael Brown cemented it, I believe,
yes,
because the children, they were peaceful protests, and Trayvon, a lot of protests. You remember Reverend Allen and everybody
Yes,
came down
down
to
in Sanford.
Sanford. There was 30, 40,000 people.
Yes.
Sanford only got about 30 or 40,000 people.
Exactly.
So when they saw 30, 40,000 black people, they didn't know what to
No,
do.
they were confused.
But then in Ferguson, they said, we're not just going to march and sing the spirituals. The young people said, we're tired of this, and
Yeah.
they started doing stuff to bring more attention.
To disrupt, yeah.
Yeah, to disturb the peace. And so I think Trayvon educated a lot of people to the point where when you saw Botham Jean and Amber Geiger's case, they were very aware that this case was going to be documented and chronicled in history. Michael Brown's case, you know, it was because of that case that President Obama signed the bill to allocate $50 million to give to local police departments
For police
for
reform.
body camera videos. So that played into it. Stephon Clark, you know, even though these police officers did not go to jail for killing him, executing him, I think in his grandmother's backyard, when you look at the surveillance video for the helicopter, when they never really gave him any choice, they shot first and asked questions later. Well, because of the young people in Sacramento, Aaron, I mean, yeah, can you imagine your city council weekly meetings not being able to function for 3 months? That's what they did in Sacramento. They said until we address Stephon Clark, there will be no going back to business as usual. And so it led to the governor of California signing the most restrictive, excessive use of force policy in America, where it says that the police can only use deadly force when necessary. So what does that translate to, Attorney O'Neill? It's the basics that if you kill a brother or sister in California, you now, based on the law, have to show everything you did before
try to
you
prevent
used
that.
fatal, force. And that's important, y'all, because the Supreme Court of the United States has given instructions to police officers when they kill people, especially people of color, that all you got to do is say these 3 little words. I was in fear, I felt threatened, or any of this stuff, and you get a get out of jail pass because, hey, you can't Monday morning quarterback the police, no matter how unbelievable, unjustifiable it was, unnecessary it was. They say, hey, the police said they felt in fear, so, and you know those black people, they real scary and
Threatening,
dangerous.
very terrifying.
And so we make progress. It's as the late Johnny Cochran said, it's a long journey to justice, but we can never, ever give up on fighting for equality for our children's future.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. To your point, Ben, so I recently wrote a story. There was we had a poll at the Associated Press, and it found that while a majority of Americans, including white Americans, do see the disparate treatment of minorities in policing, they see it as an issue. But the majority of folks, when you ask them if they felt like it was a problem that needs to be addressed, we still don't have a majority of people that believe that. And I just wonder, I mean, how is it that you can have people that see, they understand, thanks to folks like you and others that have raised the issue that, unarmed black folks are being, gunned down across this country. They recognize that that is a thing that is happening, but don't think that necessarily it is a thing that we as a country need to address.
And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, and God knows it took a long time. I have a new appreciation for you writers.
Well, you've been busy.
But, you wanted to present empirical evidence because they still don't believe it as bad as we think it is. Because I think Mr. Boger was saying we hope that it don't become normalized, all these hashtags, because it'll be a big thing this week, and then America will move on. Trump will do something crazy, and everybody will forget. And so it was important that we document this stuff and make the case to the court of public opinion that it could be chronicled for history. And especially, Aaron, when you think about the fact, it is not their reality.
Right.
They cannot fathom, men and my white brethren and sisters cannot fathom that their child will actually be killed by the person who's supposed to protect and serve them. Think about this, Aaron. You have, when it comes to people of color, this shoot first, ask questions later, where there's Botham, Atiana Jefferson, Philando, because any of these names, Terrence Crutcher had a car broke down. He didn't even commit a crime, walking away with his hands up, and the white policewoman still shot him in broad daylight. So you juxtapose that with these young white people who are confirmed mass murderers, whether it be the Parkland shooter who shot 34 people, killing 17 of them. The police tracked and followed him. They took him alive.
Dylan Roof.
You think about, before we get to Dylan, think about the Waffle House shooter in Tennessee. Shot 6 people, killing 4 of them. The police followed him into the woods. Into the woods. And then all of them came out alive. And then
El Paso,
and then obviously Dylan Roof killed 9 of the most innocent people you could ever find in that church in South Carolina. And you all remember the interviews. He said that he felt so bad about shooting them because they were so nice to him. The police followed him across state lines. And then not only did they take him alive, but they took him to Burger King for burgers and fries. And so it's just clear, white men get arrested and protected, while black men get shot and killed.
They're unable to see our humanity.
They are unable to see our humanity, or they, I digress, because Malcolm X said that one of the most powerful drugs ever created in the world was the TV. And you got to remember, the TV has you thinking things in your subconscious that you don't even realize you're thinking. So when you always see all these things saying black and brown people are dangerous, they're criminals, they're nefarious, they're evil, it seeps into your subconscious mind. So when the police officer encounters a black or brown person, you wonder how much of that implicit bias that goes into them pulling the trigger. When, Amber Geiger sees a black man, she doesn't do anything that her policy teaches her to do.
She's reacting.
She doesn't de-escalate. She doesn't do any of that stuff. She see black, she see fear, I shoot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have another lawyer who makes me sound smart sometimes, who was explaining to me, he has a police officer that he often has come and talk to his classes. And the police officer says, a white police officer, and what he says is, when he goes into white schools to talk to white children to introduce himself, the white children say, oh, you're the guy who helped me get my cat down, or you're the guy who helped my mom find directions. And when he goes into the black schools, the black children say, oh, you look like the guy that arrested my uncle.
Yeah.
So that's their experience with law enforcement. It's just two Americas, really. It's completely different for so many communities.
And that's what we have to address. We cannot have two Americas. We cannot have two justice systems, one for white people and one for people of color. We have to educate people. I often quote your native son, Ben Franklin, when I talk in different places. I
didn't know where that was going.
But in all seriousness, Ben Franklin.
The other Ben.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Ben Franklin said, democracy is like 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. You ain't got to be a genius to know how that vote gonna go. But he said, liberty. He said liberty is making sure that lamb is well armed to protest that vote. And so with this book, what we're trying to do is make sure all those young lambs in communities of color are well armed to protest the school to prison pipeline, well armed to protest voter suppression, well armed to protest racist Jim Crow laws like Stand Your Ground, well armed to protest environmental racism that would see young children living in South Central Los Angeles have a third of the lung capacity as children living in Santa Monica, California, because all these toxic polluting corporations are legally allowed to be within breathing space of many communities of color where their children play and go to school. And we have to make sure these young children are well armed to protest this prison industrial complex, Aaron, because as we cite in the book, you know, when many people go to prison or jail, they're worrying about losing their constitutional rights.
Right.
But when many minorities go to jail, especially women of color,
Yes.
they not only have to worry about losing their constitutional rights, they have to worry about losing their reproductive rights.
Well.
As late as 2014 in California, you had black women and Hispanic women having documented cases where they were coerced into forced sterilizations. And in Tennessee, as late as 2017, not a judge, but judges were standing there when black men came before them for sentencing, saying we will knock 10 years off of your 12-year sentence if you would agree to be sterilized. We're talking about genocide literally and figuratively, and it's all legal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you mentioned our current president. I am, like I said, covering the intersection of race and politics mainly these days. And, you know, one thing that I know that is different from when you first really kind of started working on these high-profile cases and now is the political climate, right? I mean, certainly in the Obama administration, you had an administration that was interested in police reform, right? You had an audience with President Obama, with Eric Holder, with Loretta Lynch that was committed to consent decrees and looking into police departments and documenting a lot of what it is that we know is true that is happening in our communities, right? Contrast that to today, you know, our president is not somebody who believes that police reform is necessary. In fact, he has nothing but praise for law enforcement, feels like there are no bad apples that need to be addressed, and that groups like Black Lives Matter and others who are pushing for these types of reforms are, in fact, harmful to our society.
Terrorist groups.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about how this work has changed for you in this political climate. And why? And I feel like that probably gave you a sense of urgency in making sure that this book was on the record.
It really was in many ways. Like I said when we started, you know, it's a continuous journey for justice. And I try not to get dismayed personally because I just think of, I have two adopted nephews that were Trayvon's age. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and it matters that we never give up the fight for them and making a better world for them. And I also think often about what Frederick Douglass said, without struggle, we can't have progress. So even though it's a very difficult time, which we're gonna struggle a lot, this is also a great opportunity to make progress because of this administration. We get to make a vivid, glaring case of why we cannot be comfortable when we think about all the injustices going on in the world. And this book, in many ways, Aaron, is a continuation of what the great Paul Robeson did in 1951, which at the time he was the most famous African American in the world. And him and W.B. Du Bois and other black leaders in the Civil Rights Congress, they went to the United Nations in Paris, France, in the aftermath of World War II, where you had all these countries making their petitions for genocide based on the atrocities and how they were being killed, and they presented, "We charge genocide against the government for the killing of Negro people in America," and they based that on the killings, the lynchings, and the rapings that happen daily in America. And they said, you know, we're looking at your definition of genocide, United Nations, which is an act or acts that are done with the intent in whole or in part to destroy a group based on national, ethnic, racial, or religious identities. So tell us how that's different from what's happening to Negroes in America. And then they concluded their report in their case with saying that either America is complicit with or they are responsible for creating a genocidal situation for Negro people in America. And I say 70 years later, either our government is complicit with or they are responsible for creating a genocidal situation for people of color. When you think about the things I spoke of, when you think about what's happening with the border, with the Hispanic people, when you think about how they are stopping the health care on the reservations with Native Americans, I mean, it's pervasive, but yet the law that is supposed to be the protector, supposed to be the last refuge against injustice, in many ways, it is the very instrument that is promulgating the injustice and how they kill us.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, just listening to you just now, I mean, you are somebody, because I've known you for as long as I have, I know that you are a student of history, you're a student of our government, of our democracy, of our Constitution, and of the law. And, you know, just as, you know, Frederick Douglass and Paul Robeson, you are somebody who, I mean, really what you have done as important as, you know, standing with these families and the legal work that you have done, you have been bearing witness, really, and not letting people look away. You know, for this whole time, you will not let them look away. Even when the spotlight left, even when the cameras leave, even, you know, as these administrations change, you have been one of the constants of this era to really keep this issue in the spotlight for people who would like to forget and for people who would like to move on. And so I think that really, as important as anything that you're doing at a press conference or on the front lines or a courtroom, like this is really why your presence is so valuable in this moment. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that.
I want to say, Aaron, thank God for you for not only writing for the Philadelphia Tribune, but having your stories, you know, broadcast all across the country. There are so many times when Aaron and I talk on the telephone that I know she's fighting to get the stories published, but sometimes they say no. And, you know, we have to fight another day.
Yeah.
You remember Trayvon, when he was killed,
it wasn't a national story at first, not for weeks.
I mean, they literally told me, you know, Ben, so why is this a story? You know, a black boy got killed.
Yeah.
Why should we write about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But contrast that to Michael Brown 2 years later, they immediately, as soon as that went down, like people were on a plane to Ferguson. I mean, I was on a plane within a day or two because they knew that this was about to really be something, and that is a testament to the work that you and others have done to push this and to really make people understand that every time something like this happens, it's not just happening in that community or to that family, it's happening to Black America. So I really appreciate that. I want you guys to start getting your questions formulated in your mind, because I know that people are going to come around with cards to ask you to put your questions down on paper for us to read them and for Ben to have a chance to answer. So I wanted to also ask you too, just to stick with politics for a little bit longer, you know, for as much awareness as there is now, And for as much as this issue remains in the headlines, unfortunately, both John and Tatiana Jefferson, just two of the latest examples, Stephon Clark earlier this year.
We got another one coming that's
exactly.
getting a lot of attention out of Louisiana.
Yes, exactly. But like the issue of police reform seems to be largely off the table, both on the campaign trail and on the debate stage, which is really surprising to me as somebody who is covering race and politics. And I just wonder if that surprises you and if you think that the candidates should be talking about this more.
Absolutely. The candidates should be talking about the police shootings as well as, I have to say, how they're killing us in the courtroom. We can't forget about that, y'all, how they kill us softly, because 1 in 5 black men in states like Florida and Tennessee, and it's not very different from many other statistics in states across America, are convicted felons.
Right.
And they believe that if this trend continues, it will be, in the next 25 years, 1 in every 3 black men in America will be convicted felons. And just think about this for a second, Aaron. When I get a chance to speak truth to power, I got to do it.
I was going to say, okay. I'm still soaking up 1 in 3.
I mean, think about it, because if you have your son and your nephew and your cousin, and they all black boys, one of them are going to be a convicted felon based on the statistics. And so we make the arguments in the book that really exacerbate this notion. And I give me 2 minutes to make this case. Can I make this case for y'all? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Boger. Don't take Ben Crump word for it. Go in any courtroom, Verness, in America. Just sit in the back of the courtroom and watch what Chuck D say, look at the justice and how they run it. You see little white boys and girls come in the courtroom and they have very similar fact patterns as little black and brown boys and girls. You see the white children get a slap on the wrist and they get escorted out the courtroom to live out the fulfillment of their destinies and achieve the American dream. You see the little black and brown children taken to the corner of the courtroom. They are fingerprinted, handcuffed, and convicted of a trumped-up felony conviction. And now, when they get that felony conviction,
it's gonna follow them.
It changes their life. You hear the things about where you can't vote, you can't serve on jury duty, you can't serve in the military. That's the tip of the iceberg when you have a felony conviction. And I see a lot of heads nodding. Y'all know people who have felony convictions. I mean, everything you can try to do from that point on, if you're a young person of color and you're trying to be legitimate, to keep a roof over your family's head and to put food on the table and keep the lights on, they start taking it away from you. I mean, if you want to be a teacher, you can't get a certification if you are a convicted felon. If you want to be a nurse, you can't get a certification if you're a convicted felon. If you want to go to college, you can't get a Pell Grant if you're a certified or convicted felon. You can't get a federal loan anymore. I mean, everything. For sisters, you can't even be a beautician in many states.
Cosmetology license.
Yeah, if you're a convicted felon. And many states, and you know what else? I say this, and I look at Chris to get permission. I just found out before I published the book. In Atlanta, you can't even be an exotic dancer if you have a felony conviction. I mean, any way you can try to legally make money, seem like they take it away from you. And if you are a convicted felon and you have served time in prison, in many states, Aaron, you can't even get life insurance. It's like you are the walking dead. They just have not given you the death certificate yet. So what we have to do every chance we get when this racist criminal justice system try to define who our young people are, we have to tell them over and over again, no, you still are the best we have to offer. You still have redeeming qualities. God still has a plan for you. We won't let this racist criminal justice system define who you are and your limitations in this life, because that is the intent of defining them as felony convictions to get them caught up in the system so they can get to the prison industrial complex, and they will have younger, stronger slaves. Slavery by any other name is just the same. I rest my case.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah. See, this is why I like to let him just go on, because I learned things like, if you have a felony, you can't get on the pole, just so you know. Never know what you're going to say in these interviews. Yeah, wow. I learned something today. I don't know about y'all. So I do want to go to Texas, though, before we open it up for questions, because there have been a couple of cases in the headlines recently, both of which you've been involved with, the Botham Jean case and now the Tatiana Jefferson case. And Botham Jean's killer, Amber Geiger, that trial was just a case with such extraordinary circumstances that produced, I guess, an extraordinary outcome. Unfortunately, she was convicted. That's something that doesn't really happen very often. But, we were talking in the green room over there about just the idea that her sentencing really just focused on the idea of black forgiveness versus righteous black anger, I would say. And I wonder, that would certainly be understandable, if the community was outraged at the way that Botham Jean was killed, and yet the emphasis was on how forgiving the community was, how forgiving the brother was, and how forgiving the black judge was, and how calm the community was in the face of that killing. This is something that we've seen over and over again in these cases. Talk to me about what you make of just the urge to kind of tamp down black anger in these situations, and how you feel about that.
Well, I think Botham Jean's case was very unique in the sense what his brother did. He was a kid, and he's trying to come to terms with it. And so I'm close to the family, and I understand that. They're very Christian people.
Right.
However, the judge, in my 25 years, I've never seen a convicted murderer get such compassion. The bailiff rubbing her hair. I just have never, ever seen any young, in fact, Aaron, you have black men make up 7% of the population in America.
Right.
But yet we make up almost 50% of the population on death row.
Yes.
Which, it's either one or two things. Black men are either bad, criminal-minded, or two, the criminal justice system is racist and discriminatory. That's the only way you can make sense of it. But you do know, and y'all see it every day almost on TV, where these people are being wrongfully convicted, and it's being shown after they spend decades in prison. And even then, you don't see them get the consideration that they gave to the white policewoman for killing Botham, who was in his own apartment, minding his own business, eating ice cream. And you're like, well, what is it? Why do they expect us to be so forgiving when the shoe is on the other foot? Hang them, lock them up.
Yeah. They get to be angry.
Yeah, they get to be angry, but black people can't. And so we have to continue to say, if we talk about equal justice, it has to look the same whether it's a black person or a white person pulling the trigger. Because the quickest way to get to death row in America is to be a person of color and to kill a white person. That's the quickest way to get to death row. And just oppose that, when a white person kills a person of color based on these Jim Crow stand your ground laws, there is no guarantee they will even be arrested. Most of the times, they get to sleep in their bed at night after they shoot young black and brown people. And so we have to come to terms with America. Look at this reflection in the mirror and just don't recite the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. We want you to act like you believe it when you say we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equally. that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights that amongst them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, America, that means black and brown people too.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and just 2 weeks after that verdict in the Amber Geiger case, you found yourself back in Texas because of Tatiana Jefferson's killing. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've been covering that too, and in some ways it feels like there are some things that are different. The way that the mayor has responded, for example, maybe the way that this interim police chief has been responding. But in some ways there are some things that felt kind of the same, right? I mean, trying to criminalize her,
Yep.
You know, or trying to make it as if she was somehow a participant in her own death. And so I'm just wondering, you know, what are some of the things that you have noticed about this case that are kind of the same or different?
Well, what I noticed is different is certainly how fast they arrested the officer and charged him.
Identified him by name quickly.
Yep.
Yeah. Put out the body cam footage.
Yep, and that was different. But in ways it's the same. You see them trying to vilify her. You also see that the police union is coming to his defense to pay all his legal fees. They're coming up with theories to say it's justified. You know, and because we cover these things constantly,
over and over.
You know, the only time that I have saw in history where the police union did not come to a police officer's defense.
Which one?
Was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when the police officer from Ethiopia shot the white woman.
No help for him.
The police union cut ties with him completely.
I wonder why.
I think about all the, you know, Alton Sterling, the police officer literally said on video, "I'm going to kill you, you big black MF." And then 2 minutes later, he killed them, and the police union defended those officers completely, paid all their legal fees and everything. But when that black man in Minnesota, they didn't do anything. He got convicted for 12 years, and then the city of Minneapolis paid $20 million
The biggest settlement
in the
ever.
civil suit, even before they answered the lawsuit. Now think about all these black men and black women they've killed, how they make you go 6 years, 7 years, sometimes, and all kind of litigation.
And not for nearly that much money.
Yeah, $20 million. And you know how it's hypocrisy, because in Philando Castile, the same city, which I submit is even more egregious, they gave him $3 million. You talk about the value of black life compared to the value of white life. You know, you just got to hold a mirror to the face of America and say, America, we can do better.
Yeah.
We can do better. And I got to make this one quick point, then we can go to questions and answers. And because I know my partner wouldn't be proud of me unless I made this point.
Okay.
Talking about Amber Geiger.
Yeah.
10 years.
Yes.
You know, Mr. Bogle, and she probably won't do that. She'll get out in 5, especially with all the considerations being done. But just oppose that, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm just trying to speak to your common sense. They got black and brown people languishing for decades in prison for selling marijuana. Nonviolent, nobody
Didn't kill
dead,
anybody,
nobody
right.
hurt. They got them in prison for decades. And now the government era has legalized marijuana in many states, and so they are selling weed to make money to pay their bills. Ain't that the same thing black people were doing? Selling weed to make money to pay their bills, and they put us in prison.
Yeah, still
so
in
what
prison.
Chris and I argue is that in this book, until the government, they shouldn't be able to make any profit from selling marijuana until they let all the black and brown and everybody else who's in prison for selling marijuana out of prison.
And also, I mean, and even those folks who are out are barred from being able to get into the cannabis business.
Yeah, and Dr. Epps, you could arguably say they're the experts.
Correct.
You know, but yet again, if you got that felony conviction,
You cannot.
anything, any way you can become legitimate, that's why we keep talking about genocide. It's almost as if they're killing our
Softly.
spirits over,
Yes.
I mean, every day you are a permanent underclass citizen. When you think of slavery, how it started in America and how it was unique from any other slavery that had ever been known in the world since antiquity, it was literally only in America and the Caribbean where they said, no, if you're a prisoner of war, you're a slave until you accept Christianity, or you're a slave until you pay your indebtedness. They said, nah, man, this slavery stuff is good for our business. I mean, we don't have to pay any labor costs. And these black people, they can do anything. They can do more than anybody else has done. I mean, they survived the slave
Middle
councils.
Passage, yeah.
They survived the Middle Passage. They can go out there in that hot sun and pick that cotton all day. We got to figure out how to keep this going. What's different about them? Their skin color. They can never change their skin color. So now we're going to define slavery based on your skin color, because that way we can keep them working in those plantations forever so we can maximize our profit. And you look now when they talk about the private prisons and where they're guaranteeing that we will fill these jail cells in states if you don't guarantee that we can put bodies, I submit to you, black and brown bodies, in these prison cells, then we're going to penalize you. You all got to pay us. So they're literally incentivizing the government to go make sure your sons and daughters are defined as criminals, because as my professor told us at Florida State, I can get rid of all the crime in America overnight. And he would bet us, and we were like, well, Dr. Jones, we ain't got $500 to take your bet, but how can you get rid of all the crime in America overnight? And Epps, he says simply, change the definition of crime. If I get to write the laws and say what we're going to define as criminal, I can guarantee you who's going to be the criminals. And what they're doing is criminalizing the culture. And that's why we see those statistics where you have all these black and brown people being defined as convicted felons.
At one time, it was only the black press that would tell the story of the African-American experience. And many times that was also tried to be buried and denied. And history has proven that. My question in the end is, where are we going to go from here? I mean, we have forgotten the Emmett Tills of the world. And of course, until Rodney King was videoed, white America was in denial. And so now that we have at least had the opportunity to expose some of the ills of this great nation, where do we go from here?
I think that's a very profound question, because that's been the lingering question. Where do we go after we show the truth? I think a couple of points. And Aaron, he's trying to give you the mic back. Okay. Thank you. I think a couple of points, Mr. Bogle. Number one, I think the Constitution is a great document. America is a great country. Don't ever think that we're not the greatest country, because we still afford people who have been marginalized and disenfranchised a chance to improve their lot in life. Many countries in the world, you just can't, no matter what you do. So if we make these dead words on paper in this Constitution correct when we breathe life into them, because only people can breathe life in them, then that helps us. Probably when we think about this being a capitalistic society, the biggest problem, and I talk about this at the end of the book, we have to re-envision incarceration, because as long as it is financially incentive in a capitalized society to incarcerate people, a blind man can see ain't nothing gonna change, And so we got to make sure that our children are more intelligent than their oppressors. I mean, that is the only way we're gonna win this battle. We cannot win this battle with guns. We can't win it with bullets and violence. It's only going to be intellect and diplomacy and abilities to overcome whatever the enemies of equality can come up with. And that's where we go from here. We work on it every day. And I have a passage in the book when my little 13-year-old cousin, very personal, and you can read the book and get all the graphic details of it, but they was trying to label him a sexual predator and charge him with lewd and lascivious assault because he at 13 and a little white girl at 13 liked each other. And the notes got out. Apparently, they showed some affection in the cafeteria or something. And when their parents found out, they literally was trying to put I call him my nephew, is my little cousin who my aunt and I helped raise, and put him in juvenile detention and charged him with lewd and lascivious assault. And one of the things, it shook him so much, and I was out of town, it took my law partner and my aunt literally calling everybody we knew to prevent them from arresting him. And just think about the little black and brown children who don't have those resources, all the black men who have been charged with sexual assaults on white women where there was, you think about Black Wall Street, and I mean, everything, Emmett Till, and after that, Marcus, who came to live with me from North Carolina in a bad situation of domestic violence and living in the projects, and was really doing well in high school when he came to live with us. After that day, he wanted to leave and go back into the hell of being in the projects where his mother was being abused by her partner, because he really saw that they were going to put him in jail for him and this little girl having mutual affection for one another. And I told Marcus, you can never outrun racism in America.
Right.
And we started saying this little Pledge of Allegiance every morning, him and my other little nephews, and I won't go through the whole poem, but it starts off, and we called it the Black Pledge of Allegiance. And it said, today is another day in the struggle for the liberation of black people. This liberation demands revolution. This revolution lives within me, for I am the hope of the slave. I am the antagonist to the white supremacy conclave. I am the very definition of ebony, hard, heavy, dark, black, durable wood that safeguards everything in my neighborhood. Because I wanted my boys to know it didn't matter that Uncle Ben may be wealthy and may be famous. It doesn't matter. You are still a target every time you go outside this house. And I wanted their minds to be right and ready to overcome the racist criminal justice system that has them in their crosshairs. And so whatever you do, we got to have our children, our young lambs ready every day, because at any given day, when they're with their little white friends, and it ain't fair, they may be marijuana in the car, and they arrest everybody in the car, there's a good chance that the white kids are going to get a slap on the wrist, but he's going to get some kind of record over that.
Yeah,
and so every day, y'all, we have to have our children ready.
Well, yeah, seriously. Shoot me a copy of that Black Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to need to say that in the mirror in the mornings myself.
Page 182 of the book.
Listen, exactly. You can see, y'all got to buy the book just for that Black Pledge of Allegiance right there. We're gonna go lightning round.
Okay, lightning round.
Because you know how you like to do.
Yeah.
So we have a question.
Erin, when she be asking me these questions on the phone, she keep going deep and deep. I be trying to get off the phone, so she getting me back today.
That's fake news. So looking at the demographics of this audience, you're preaching to the choir. Mm-hmm. So how do you get through to the other choir? Since it's not their reality.
It's fascinating, though. I was the keynote speaker, I told you, and Chris, you knew, at the Boston Book Festival on Sunday, it was, Chris, and I was shocked. I came out, I had to tell Chris, They had about 500 people in the audience, and only 10 of them were black.
Because you counted, black math. That's what we do.
Yeah,
Like-
and so it's what I hope, what I pray is the book will become a conversation piece, that you all will read it and go tell others to read it. And so it will become something that when people go sit in the courtrooms and serve on juries, they will consider the thesis of this book, and they won't be so quick to believe the police and the prosecutors as the gospel, and everything that the little black or brown person say as being unbelievable, not credible. And I know we're in the lightning round, so I'll leave it there, but that's the hope.
Yeah.
And so we do have to get the message. As Gayle King said on her show, it's a conversation piece for America. Let's hope America converse about it.
Yeah. Buy a book for another choir member. Okay, next question. As a police lieutenant, I have observed white officers who are opposed to racism. However, they, as well as black officers, are afraid to report corrupt officers as they are not protected and face Serpico retaliation. How can we begin to hold police commanders accountable for something? For protecting these officers to continue, or for allowing these officers to continue with outright racism.
Yeah, well, you know, it's scary, and Aaron, you know this better than me because you're in the media and y'all been doing your homework, and thank God for a free press. And I want to give that a round of applause because
It doesn't exist everywhere.
A lot of people are trying to get rid of it, Mr. Bogle. But you all know they did those studies and found all those KKK members as police officers. And that's alarming.
And operating on social media, putting all kind of racist stuff on social?
That is very scary. Think about how many cases they have made. We have a case right now where a DEA agent has been charged and convicted of lying and making up false affidavits, putting pressure on black people to tell and to indict black people who've been in prison now for multiple decades, and now he's about to be going in Louisiana for his second trial where his fellow officers are telling on him. So there's hope, but to answer that question directly, I think it goes down to always the same thing, Brother Mincy and Fitzpatrick. It goes to transparency plus accountability equals trust. You got to figure out how to make them be transparent. We need those citizen review boards. We need city council people who have courage to speak up for our people and for equality. And I then digress and say this real quick in the lightning round. I used to go on a show, and I won't call his name, but every one time we have one of these police shootings, it rhymes with a box. Let's say like that. And I would go on the show, and he would say, well, Attorney Crump, you're an upstanding counselor, you're a fine representative and everything. You aren't saying that all police officers are bad people, are you? Because wouldn't you agree, most of them are good people? I would gather myself because I'm a trial lawyer, and I'll say, now, are you saying all black people are bad people? Because when you agree, most of them are good people, wouldn't you? Because you can't let them have the high ground on morality. You got to say, as Dr. King said, there's some bad in the best of us and some good in the worst of us. And so I think police are people. We got to acknowledge that all of them are not saints, America. All of them are not choir boys. Just like all black people aren't saints. All black people aren't choir boys. But it's what Dr. King said. We are human. There's going to be some good and bad amongst all of us. Now, you all have clearly tried every chance you get to demonstrate that there are bad black people in the world. But you have never ever acquiesce that there are many bad police officers in the world too. And until you are ready to speak that truth and admit there's a problem, we can never get to a solution.
Right. So I'm gonna have to.
My mic is off. One more question.
One more question. Oh wow. Okay.
They said we gotta go, y'all.
Because there were so many good ones in here.
You pick the best one, and I'll hold
There
it
were
to
so many good ones.
1
in here.
minute.
Well, okay. This one is a question about, because you've done so many of these, I want to ask you about the toll that this work takes on you, and how you keep going. I mean, you talked about Thurgood Marshall being your hero. You were obviously on that continuum and the struggle for progress. Even if you are not going to see justice fully realized in your lifetime, you are still doing what you can while you are here. Why are you still doing that, and what is it that keeps you going, even in the face of tremendous odds?
No, Aaron, and I can say the same thing about you. You see it all, I'm sure, on the front line, but yet you still want to continue to write that next story to hopefully get to one person and make a difference in this situation in their life. And as I look at my brother, attorney Michael Cord, a great lawyer, and all these great lawyers in
Michael walking
Philadelphia, I truly think that you have to think about what our ancestors endured. You know,
That's exactly what I
Harriet
think about.
Tubman, the Ida B. Wells, the Frederick Douglasses of the world, the Denmark Vessies, you know, all of them. And then the perfect way to conclude this evening, and I say it often in speeches, is you just got to have courage and follow your conscience. And you can't let anything betray that belief. Dr. King said it best. He said that the coward asked the question, is it safe? He said expediency asked the question, is it politically correct? He said, oh, vanity comes along and asks the question, is it popular? But then he said conscience comes along and asks the question, is it right? And he said there comes a time when one must take a position that's neither popular nor politically correct, not even safe, but one must take a position because their conscience tells them it's the right thing to do. Philadelphia, I believe it is the right thing to do to stand up for our children. I believe it's the right thing to do to speak up for our children. I believe it's the right thing to do to fight for our children's future, because if we don't do it, we can't expect nobody else to do it for us. And I want my daughter to know I love her, not just with lip service, but she can see the actions every day. And that's what motivates me, because the young people are watching everything we do. I remember my preacher said, you can con a con, you can fool a fool, but you cannot kill a kid. When we say Black Lives Matter, they want to see it for real. So let's help them and all our children know that their lives matter. I thank you, Philadelphia. I thank you, Aaron Rich.
And thank you all for a great conversation.
We got it on Facebook Live.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you, Aaron Haynes. And thank you, Ben Crump. What can I say? Truth to power.